Welcome to the Behaviour Speak Podcast. Now, here's your host, Ben Ryman.
Hi, everybody. When I recently had a couple of podcast CEU promotions where I offered free CEUs for select content in February and April, I noticed a real uptake in the purchase of IBA and QABA related CEUs. What I also noticed was that when those promotions end, the purchasing of both of those types of CEUs dropped almost immediately, and I wondered kind of what was going on. And after some conversations with some colleagues in Pakistan and Nigeria and Ghana in particular, I realized that the rates I was charging for CEUs in Canadian dollars were a bit too high for some of these locations. Not so much because these people are living in poverty or anything like that, but more so because of things like the exchange rate and the U.S. dollar kind of being central and being quite expensive in some of these regions. That in combination with some of the sort of systems that are required for folks to make payments internationally. The way those systems work in those countries is quite different. In any case, I'm piloting something this month and sort of indefinitely, and we'll see how it goes, where I'm going to be offering IBAO CEUs for 50% off the regular price of all my other CEUs. So if you are an IBAO certificate, then you'll be eligible for 50% off. Simply when you purchase the CEU, just purchase as you normally would. And when you get to the final sort of last page of the shopping cart, there'll be an option to click IBA, and then the 50% discount would be applied to all CEUs. So hopefully that goes well. I'm not applying it to the QABA CEUs right now because I do know there are a lot of folks in the US that are QABA certified, and so this isn't as big of an issue. Certainly, if folks are struggling in some of these countries for the similar reason, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to look at something individually. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and take care. Welcome to another episode of the Behaviour Speak Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ben Ryman. On the podcast today, we've got Dr. Michael Mueller on the show. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. So this is a different kind of episode for me, and I normally don't need to do this during an episode, but I thought just for sake of transparency, I'll declare a little conflict of interest in this one. In that we're going to be talking today about the International Behavior Analyst Organization, and of which Mike is the is it CEO or ED? What's that?
Executive Director.
Executive Director, and I happened upon the IBAO, and I'll let Mike kind of tell this story in more detail. What kind of when it first sort of came into fruition, and was excited about the idea. And we'll talk about why it's in existence and all that sort of thing momentarily as well. But I sort of put my name in the hat to join the professional advisory board and early on, and as sort of a representative from Canada, even though we're not really affected by the reasons for this organization. It was nice to be a part of it, but I'm really happy to kind of get into it and kind of explain to folks, where it came from and what it's all about. Kind of before we get into that, Mike, I wouldn't mind I'd like to get a little bit of an origin story from folks and kind of how they got into the field and kind of what led them to the work you're doing now. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you got an ABA.
That's a good question. I don't. Everybody gets in different ways, and a lot of the people that I know got in because they are impacted in some way, typically by a relative or close friend or something like that of a child with autism. Mine's quite different. I had I was I went to West Virginia University for undergrad in psychology. Really, just because I found it interesting. I didn't have, lofty dreams of being a behavior analyst. As it turns out, West Virginia University is a very, very powerful behavior analytic program. So the faculty and graduate students there were really deep into behavior analysis. I didn't even appreciate at the time the differences in different types of psychology.
Sure.
So I was kind of pushed in this direction, and I formed some good relationships with some of the grad students there, but it was all experimental stuff. I ended up doing like an undergrad honors thesis where we injected rats with cocaine, and I spent a lot of time in dark laboratories, watching little beeps and clicks, and it was like a rat lab kind of environment. And I thought at the time that's really what I wanted to do. I loved the scientific part. I loved all of the research that I understood at that point that was going into all of those different studies and the very kind of basic aspects of what it is we do now in an applied sense. I also had a couple opportunities to do some applied experiences, which they just felt a lot different when you're out in the sun and you're working with cute little kids and you're not just in a box all day, and you can really do the same things, as it turns out, in an applied way, and feel good about your impact on society. And I saw these people making really good contributions to literature, and that's then kind of how I shifted gears from wanting to be an experimental researcher and probably a faculty member somewhere to wanting to do things in a more applied way that had a more direct impact on things that had a more tangible improvement in people's lives. So,
but you probably weren't injecting the kids with cocaine.
We haven't yet.
No.
No, not yet. But some of those studies were, I think anybody that does an undergraduate, honors thesis or anything like that, they have been granted the ability to help a faculty's research in some way, and they're kind of designated a pseudo lead, although technically you're not. So it wasn't my study. I was really not the principal, but I was just tagged with being the lead helper. Is probably the best way to put it.
Gotcha. So at what point you've got your PhD and your BCBAD. So, what got you to go from, undergrad to graduate school and eventually to PhD? Were you practicing at all during that time, or I've talked to quite a few folks. It's so different in the States, I think, because, like you said, you have these programs where you can actually do undergrad work in behavior analysis, and many folks will do that, and then they'll stay in the same school and do their master's, and stay at the same school and do their PhD, and then maybe eventually they'll actually, work with people, or they'll just start doing research. So, what was kind of your pathway to the PhD and beyond?
At risk now of looking back and being really naive about the process, I really was much more interested in playing hockey while I was in college than doing anything academic. And you get to a point where then you realize you're not going to go past your college hockey career. And you have an undergraduate degree in psychology, which when people get into psychology, they probably don't realize that there's not a million things you can do with an undergraduate degree in psychology. So all of the choices that seemed to be available had to come with additional education, which also at the time I really hadn't considered. I didn't go into college thinking this is step one and there's going to be a master's and a PhD. You kind of get to a point where you realize if you're going to do any of the stuff that you're interested in, you have to go on. So I wouldn't say it was like a last minute decision, but it did, I think, occur to me anyway, fairly late in the game and probably later than it should have. So I applied to some programs and got into a couple, but just didn't feel right about it. And then also got rejected from some. I was also quite naive about the GRE process and the studying that goes into that. So I was afforded a really, really awesome opportunity by one of my faculty at West Virginia, Mike Mueller, who is very, very well known, and especially in the experimental circles, stimulus equivalents, things like that, to go to the University of Kansas at Parsons and work with Kate Saunders and Dean Williams, who are also, top of the field in stimulus equivalents, especially with humans. So I did after bachelor's degree, graduate school, like a post-baccalaureate experience for about a year and a half at the University of Kansas, where I actually did study for and appreciate the GRE. I went back and audited a stats class at a community college, learned the ins and outs of stimulus equivalents and research applications and human applications, and learned how to brew beer. So it was a well-rounded year and a half. And then I reapplied during that year with a better appreciation for what I wanted to do. You kind of mature a little bit, especially as you're putting in a lot of time and a lot of effort to prepare for your next stage. So I was now better informed that in psychology, there are certain disciplines that can lead to getting a license in psychology. And you have to also appreciate this was 1996, 1997. There was no BCBA. The only, billing sources, if you will, would be faculty consultation. And those contracts were typically worked out with the universities. Or you had to have a license in psychology in order to bill insurance companies. So having a license in psychology was looked at as a good thing back then, because there was a way to, have a salary, basically. In school psychology, counseling psychology, and clinical psychology, 3 disciplines within psychology that you can get a license. So experimental and educational and, IO and all these other, important branches of psychology, those cannot lead to licensure. Clinical psychology programs basically don't exist in a behavioral, philosophical presentation. They're kind of anti-theoretical, most of them. Counseling psychology, more or less the same way. There's not behaviorally oriented or behavior analytic counseling psychology programs, but there are some in school psychology, and a lot of very prolific, well-known behavior analysts have school psychology PhDs. So that's the route that I went. So during this year, I applied at the handful of behavioral or behavior analytic kind of oriented school psychology programs, and ended up getting into the University of Southern Mississippi and decided to go there.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, I'm not looking to get into this too much. This certainly be a topic for a different conversation, but at some point, I know for some folks, you're sort of pre-IBAO, you were kind of associated with the AFLS, the Assessment of Functional Living Skills. I don't know much about it. Were you involved in? Did you? Are you one of the creators of that, or are you the creator of that? What's sort of that story?
I would say the creator. The original idea, I think, started with me, and then I'm a co-author. So Dr. Jim Partington and I co-wrote all of the guide and the 6 protocols. But that's a relatively interesting story too. Probably, I don't know about beyond the scope of this meeting relative to IBAO, but that was our practice at the time had my clinical practice is 90% in public schools. We consult on severe behavior cases in public school settings. So kind of the most destructive behavior that goes on in public schools, those are the cases that we get. That's always been my applied niche more than anything else. When you get these cases and solve them and reduce problem behavior so that it's not interfering or preventing kids from learning anything, then you realize they're really not, a lot of them aren't really being taught anything in the first place. It's all just kind of defensive strategies and suppression or whatever.
Yes.
And then you go, okay, well, what is relevant to teach this group? Which is broad. I'm not trying to homogenize it, but there are a lot of the folks who are especially a little bit older, their disability maybe has a more severe impact on language and communication and cognitive abilities. There wasn't really anything. So everybody was relying back on essentially the ABLES. And the ABLES is a developmentally normed assessment from 0 to 5. So if you have a 10-year-old, 13-year-old, 15-year-old, even if you're trying to follow this, do an assessment, let the results of the assessment guide, what it is you teach, or at least help you in that direction. I know there's a lot of conversation around that, but not to be controversial about, using the results of an assessment to create a teaching program. There wasn't anything to use. And so people were pulling skills out of thin air or using the results of assessments that weren't really relevant to this population. And there just seemed to be a really big gap. And having worked in the schools, we were trying to teach people, or establish at least, that schools should also assess first, then create programs. Assess first, then create programs. So it's not just IEP teams sitting around going, oh, let's get them to write his name. Let's get them to do this and that, which they may not have the prerequisite skills for. So do an assessment, let that guide you practice. And then you get all these kids that are like, okay, what assessment do you want us to use? And there's no good answer. So that's what sort of led me approaching Jim Partington about there really needs to be something else, a second one, a follow-up of something. That's kind of how we initially conceptualized it, and then ended up agreeing to and then creating the AFLs. That was like the 2010 through 2015, basically.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I was kind of curious actually where it all came from. I mean, yeah, obviously you don't want to sort of generalize and assume everybody needs the same thing, but I think you're right. I mean, in school settings, you come in and deal with sort of severe level behaviors or whatever, and the assumption is that okay, these are the ones blocking learning. The assumption is now they're happily going to learn, but the problem often is that especially if you're into sort of that adolescent range, these kids have probably had these kinds of problems for most of their school lives, and have probably spent most of their school lives in sort of these either isolated, seclusion, depending on how old they are, how far back you're going. Actually, not really depending on how far back you're going. It's still happening today. And or in some sort of kind of play type random activity setting, and then like you said, these IEPs often have really random goals of sort of, well, someday they might need to say hi or write their name or ring a doorbell, so let's teach that, but what's that related to anything else? And and how can you kind of develop a teaching plan for multiple years? You don't, every year they're writing their name. Every year they're tracing the alphabet and that sort of thing. And anyone who works in schools has certainly seen that. And obviously there are examples of settings where that's not happening, and that's great. But certainly back in your day, that would have been there, back in the 90s, that would have certainly, and beyond, that would have been a commonplace thing. So yeah, and I did not know that you worked primarily sort of in the school setting, which makes a whole lot of sense as sort of the impetus to kind of develop this kind of curriculum. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the other side to that is when you have a long-term relationship with some of the schools, and you literally see the same kids doing the same thing for year after year after year. The classroom may change, the teacher may change, but they're just sort of stuck in this totally unproductive, rut. And you go in and you talk to the teachers, like, what are we doing today? Yeah, like you have this kid 7 hours a day, you know what I mean, for a really long time. What are we doing to legitimately help and improve their skill set, make them more independent, teach language, teach communication, not just pass them along to the next year? And they're struggling. Like you said, I think it was probably worse at one point. It's not awesome now. Many places, it's still you can still find the the same thing. So it's nice when you can get in and make a difference. And I think this particular tool has opened people's eyes to, at least in many situations, to what's really important for different groups of people. There has been a mentality in the past. It's like if you start the ABLES assessment, you don't come off of that until all the different cells have been filled in, and it can lead to some really damaging situations, in my opinion, when you're stuck on teaching skills for I have a 17-year-old doing letter sounds and shape sorters and these types of things instead of learning to to try to make it on their own. That's what's important.
Well, yeah, and I mean, part of the reason, I think we infantilize sort of, some of these older folks is because all of our curricula and teaching tools are 4 and 5-year-olds, and so we're still giving them the 5-year-old storybook and so on and so forth. My, prior to kind of doing what I'm doing now, most of my experience is working with adults in kind of group homes and residential settings, and and as we know, and it's not much different today, there's not a lot of funding or opportunity. I think it's gotten a little better sort of in recent years, but there's not a lot of opportunities for these folks to sort of learn, some of these kind of basic skills. And then they end up being in sort of these 24-hour care settings, often 1 or 2-to-1 staffing to do sort of, basic skills and, of whether it's using the bathroom or brushing your teeth or eating a meal and let alone sort of, interacting with other people. And so, I often had a lot of resentment towards schools that, these they have a ton of funding. We're told that at least in our area that in Canada, I'm in Canada, so we don't have insurance, so we have this sort of funding model for kids under 6, and then we're told that funding model actually continues till they're 18. But what happens is the money goes to the schools. So the dedicated autism specific money goes to the schools. And what really happens is it's used to for other things. It's not used for that individual, and so I said, like, resentment. I resented that there was so much opportunity in these school settings to do all the things that you mentioned exactly. We do not have to teach them to sit in an English lit class, and be quiet for 45 minutes. Let's take advantage of the fact that we have a community around this school. Let's learn some street crossing and learn some sorts of basic things so that maybe they don't have to be in a 24-hour group home when they turn 19, which is also, and I won't rant too often because I know you got to go eventually. But just some of the stuff that we focus on in with these adults is really frustrating. So I'm really glad that folks like yourself took it upon to kind of do that. And I have seen folks use things like the AFLs, and there's some other ones now with adults. I mean, they are applicable to the 19, 20, 25-year-old. And I think that's really nice too, because it might have been intended for the teenager, but a lot of that applies into adulthood.
Absolutely, yeah, it's throughout the lifespan. And excuse me, if you can find funding or interest or obviously as kids get older, the funding and opportunity for instruction decreases, which is sad, which also I think kind of feeds into what the reason why most behavior analysts do what they do is because there's funding for it, and that funding is always sort of ratcheted down towards the early intensive behavior intervention, which is awesome, obviously. But the need doesn't stop in the early part, and most, at least, everybody that has long-term experiences with whoever they serve probably is biased in that direction. We have our population that we support more dangerous behavior, lower language, probably lower cognitive abilities. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And that population, the needs are lifelong. And so when funding and opportunity go down, you have a lot of people whose instruction just pauses at a certain time, whether that's, end of high school or whatever else, and whatever skills they leave with, that's basically what they have going forward. So it is quite sad sometimes to see kids get to that point and not be ready. And it's very, you have a totally different feeling of optimism when you see kids who are prepared to go on to the next stage because they have these things, and it has positively impacted, living arrangements and social opportunities and vocational opportunities and the things that people need to be independent.
Well, and I think also there's, we talk about early intervention being so valuable and important, but, and I've talked about this in a lot of other episodes around, there's a lot of barriers to folks even, getting early intervention, let alone getting a diagnosis, especially if you're, a person of color or from any kind of, minority kind of background. And so, I work with a lot of folks that, didn't even get their diagnosis till age 7, 8, or 9 because either wait lists or access or whatever. And then all of a sudden there's none of those services available. So again, to have, some systems and some, assessment tools available after 6 that can still, give some families a bit of hope, kind of going forward. And it also speaks to, as a bit of a segue here, most of this conversation is North American, the access to services, the systems that are in place, all those sorts of things. Certainly we have a lot of barriers here, but, looking at countries around the world where, ABA hasn't had 50 years to develop. It's had, 5 years or 10 years or 2 years or just now, or thanks to the organization, they're just kind of getting into those sorts of things. And so, it's, there's a bigger picture. So what I really want to talk about today is the IBAO, the International Behavior Analyst Organization. And I think it's helpful, I think, that when you're talking about sort of your origin story and kind of, getting your psychology license and whatnot, and how there wasn't a BACB back then, and there wasn't, funding models and all these sorts of things available. And I think it's important that, if someone's going in and trying to create something like this, that they're aware of that history, either by talking to people or actually experiencing it. And I think it's great that you were around before the BACB. And so, you have that perspective to kind of bring to the table. I know maybe we could start by just talking a bit about, I think a lot of folks listening will know why, but I think some won't. What is the IBAO, and why did you want to create this organization? Are you a BCBA supervisor looking to streamline your practice? Or maybe you're working towards your BCBA and need to find the right supervisor. Whomhouse offers tools that make supervision so much more enjoyable for both supervisor and supervisee. For supervisors, they offer easy meeting documentation, competency tracking, monthly verification forms, a built-in supervision curriculum, and so much more. For supervisees, Whomhouse has a fieldwork tracker with built-in auditing, monthly verification forms, a curriculum, quizzes, and more. If you're looking for a supervisor, they even have a supervision marketplace where you can connect with BCBAs until you find your perfect match, kind of like professional dating. For more information, go to whomhouse.com/speak or search Whomhouse on Google. If you're planning on collecting continuing education credits for this episode, you'll need to enter the 3 secret words at www.cbiconsultants.com/shop. The first secret word is international.
The IBAO is an organization that provides 2 different certifications, one for behavior analysts and one for behavior therapists. It was created in the beginning of 2020, really in a direct response to the BACB's decision to stop providing certifications outside of North America. And when I say that, there's a little asterisk by that. UK, Australia have at least a provisional continuance through 2025. I know they're both working on their own thing, so it may not matter, but North America, pretty much. And I have really through AFLS, I've had some great opportunities to train and consult internationally. So I had some firsthand appreciation of the differences of the way, public perception about disabilities, public perceptions about autism, use, acceptance, familiarity with ABA as an intervention. You get used to in the United States being able to see, like, you watch a football game, right, on Sunday afternoon, and you might see an Autism Speaks commercial or a commercial or a public advertisement kind of dispelling myths and things like this. Like there's a very well-funded educational program, may not be the best word, but it's out there. There's commercials and radio spots and things like this that educate and make people aware of the general notion that of what is appropriate and inappropriate information around autism, right? I mean, you don't see like ABAI and BACB doing these things, but autism in general, which one sort of informs the next. Other places, not only don't they have that, they don't have federal special education laws like the United States and Canada have. They don't have the same view of rights and things like that. It's very, very different. And as I think perceptions of people with autism and disabilities, is worse, services for how to help and appropriate interventions are also less common because people are not quite as public about some of those things. But anyway, I've had different opportunities to kind of feel this myself. I didn't really appreciate at that time how difficult it was in many places for people to even attempt to get certifications through the BACB, living internationally, for a lot of different reasons. And when I was doing a training in the very, very beginning of January 2020 in the Republic of Moldova, and they had just gained some, I guess they had just got approved for grant money through a UN program to eventually send a couple people to the U.S. to get trained, come back certified. But it was going to be a multi-year approach, and they didn't have the funding yet. They had been approved for it, but that approval was not going to be able to meet the deadline set by the BACB. And so I was there when they were really kind of figuring this out and doing the math on it and looking at the calendar kind of stuff. And they were really crushed. The organization that I was over there to train was formed. It started by the mother of the first individual in Moldova who was diagnosed with autism. And that first diagnosis was 2006.
Oh my gosh!
Now I wouldn't sit here and say that was the first person with autism, but I think it just kind of speaks to that was the first time, and maybe parents weren't seeking that diagnosis, or physicians weren't giving it, whatever the case may be. But that's that's relatively recent, 2006 in this field. So there, not that there can't be. Obviously, ABA is much bigger than autism. It's actually funny that's always the qualification, but I wish I had the actual numbers, but it's got to be at least 90% of the people on ABA. Not behavior analysis in general, but applied behavior analysis. Got to be 90% plus. I am actually guessing, but that would be my guess.
It's probably pretty high, yeah.
But anyway, so especially probably internationally, without autism, you're not going to have ABA most likely, right? We're not doing the sports applications. We're not doing OBM applications and these kind of things.
Right.
So that means probably the field wasn't even around or known about or anything else until at least then too. So like you said, not everybody has a 50-year history of ABA. It's really, really kind of relatively new. And not just in small circles too. I mean, but think about this. I don't know, where you live, but if I walked out into the local mall, right, and just stopped random people and went, what's applied behavior analysis? I don't think most people know. I don't think most people are going to have
Mm-hmm.
just a good impression, right? And like recalling, the way that we dress and the way that we talk and our education level and our ethics and these kind of things. I don't think people in general have a recognition of what ABA is, just to, the average Joe on the street type of thing. And so you can, and that's with us having a 50-year history, right? So when someone has a 10-year history, I mean, it's an uphill climb. It was an uphill climb for a lot of folks to attempt the certifications because of cost, educational requirements, language issues, translation issues, all these kind of different things. And so it was very, very difficult. So when this particular group kind of fought against all that, got funding, and then had that sort of dashed out, this was a very, very fresh emotion in this room. And when they were explaining it to me, it was palpable. You couldn't sit there and not really feel their anguish. They were really upset by it, and that really moved me. And I didn't appreciate at the time, how common, not identical, but how common some of these feelings were with people all over the place. So when I got back, I started talking to. It was like this thing that I couldn't get rid of it. You know what I mean? It was like. I started talking to other people who had very similar experiences, other people who consult and do training and things like that, or are abroad, just practicing. And there was kind of a unanimous, these things are kind of existing all over the place, and it's difficult. And I actually, contacted the group in Moldova and tried to convince them to create a certification that kind of took all those things into place. And they, between the idea of not having enough bandwidth and really kind of being afraid to take it on, they said no. And I'm thinking then, well, someone's going to, I'd like to be a part of this, because I think we could do it in a way that addresses what it is the international community needs, because I do think it is a little bit different. I know it is a little bit different now. So that was that was the impetus for starting the organization. And when we started, we knew we had kind of a 3-year run-up period to get ready for what the date that just passed was essentially the starting line for us.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious, sort of, I get sort of access to training. That's one thing, So, I think there's a lot of folks, and I think still today there's a lot of folks from around the world that are, and I think COVID probably helped in a way in terms of more online programs. There's lots of ways that folks, in any part of the world, if they've got a decent enough internet connection, can. And the funding, that is, that they can get trained in behavior analysis. They don't have to come to the U.S. anymore. I know that used to be the case for a lot of folks. That, I've interviewed quite a few folks that have, many that are some that are on the board and some that are not, that have, that came overseas and went to school here in the U.S. or in Canada or whatever. But now, it's pretty accessible. Why isn't that enough? Like, what I understand in North America, in U.S. in particular, and it's starting to be a thing more so in Canada, why sort of certification is necessary, and it equates a lot to sort of insurance funding and sort of and licensure and all those sorts of things. But why does someone in Moldova or Botswana or anywhere else need a certification in behavior analysis?
Well, the short answer is nobody needs it. Maybe only recently in the U.S. for funding purposes, but that's not why certifications exist. That's a benefit, I think, over a long period of time, but that's not why they were started. The question about access is an important one, and that's a barrier. So, in order to get a BCBA, you have to have a master's degree.
Right.
Any verified course sequence has to be from a credit-bearing institution. There were a couple exceptions to that internationally, but more or less, it's that people don't have a lot of access to in their native language at home. Master's level ABA classes around the world are few and far between. So if someone's going to take advantage of online classes here, beyond the stable internet connection, you're talking between $10,000 and $20,000, and it's in English. And so it has created, for right and wrong, and you can look back historically through science throughout the ages or whatever, and there's always been a language of science. And, it is English for ABA, but when you kind of step back from that and you realize that to be a behavior analyst, you have to be a fluent English speaker, writer, and exam taker. And that is really patently unfair to a lot of people who maybe they can hold a conversation, maybe they can't. But why is the expectation that they have to do behavior analysis? And so with a lack of test centers, natural, native language programs, costs, and because they are not required, it's a lot of hoops to jump through for a lot of different people in a lot of different places to get there. So why would someone do that? The BACB did a fantastic job of kind of establishing the need for certification. So why do people get certified in the first place? Basically, the way that I look at it, and there's other moving parts to this, but I think primarily it's a very basic level of community protection. The more people who are providing ABA services, the more people who are going to be doing that poorly. The more people who are going to be doing that without the required education, experience, knowledge, etc., that the field should establish as kind of an industry standard. So without certifications, let's say there's 100 people providing ABA services, maybe 80 of them have done sort of all the right moves educationally and in their history to gain the right experiences and supervision, all these kind of things. And there's 20 that haven't. How is a consumer of these services supposed to tell the difference?
Yes.
Because there are quote unquote experts all around the world who are literally providing these services, and it's horrible. It's harmful. It's dangerous. It's unethical. It's not applied behavior analysis. It's not based on behavior analysis. And it's really damaging the reputation in some areas. And there's no way to distinguish that person from the next person. So once you can kind of get that stamp that, hey, I've done the right educational practices, I have the right experiential practices, supervision, I've agreed to practice ethically, I've been tested on this information, so I have a knowledge base and these kinds of things. Once more people in the community have that, so let's say the 80 people now have that and the 20 people don't, it's a lot easier for the consumers to tell who's inside and who's outside of this bubble of industry standards. Obviously, that doesn't mean you can't have a certified person, behaving badly or practicing poorly or whatever it may be. But as a general starting point, you can find out, who was a plumber who decided to hang a shingle and provide ABA services, and who has dedicated, the sort of blood, sweat, and tears to get to a place where the field has said this is really the minimum requirements to start practicing. That is the most basic form of protection. The other way I look at it too is kind of from the opposite side as well. I think it's really important for the people who have made their sacrifices, who have gone to school, whether it's a master's degree or just the course sequences, who have worked and done practice hours, and they've been supervised or paid for supervision. They've studied for these exams, which now it's a whole other expense. Supervision can be another expense, and whatever people. I was talking to some test prep people, and it's almost there's almost nobody that just kind of rolls right from their grad program in supervision into the BACB exams. Most people use some kind of test prep, which adds another, layer of expense. So anyway, people have done all these different things and dedicated their life to this. And I think it's a recognition for this. So I got my PhD in 2002. I got my BCBA in 2002. I felt like when I got my BCBA, it really put the PhD part into focus. It really kind of made others know that my PhD was relevant to this specific kind of subspecialty.
Yes.
And it was very, very meaningful to me. I mean, I felt, we were proud to be behavior analysts. We called ourselves behavior analysts before we had BCBAs, but now this was kind of like this official tag that you got that now showed, the general community, like, oh, this guy's a behavior analyst. He's not just whatever, psychological PhD, whatever. So I was, I was incredibly enthusiastic about getting it. And I know other people feel the same way. So I think it is a recognition, not that you went to grad school, not that you did X, Y, and Z, but specifically this particular field, has said, you're one of us.
Yeah. No, that's really, really cool. You brought up a lot of good points around, especially around the language, so doing stuff in your native language. And you're right, there haven't been, programs in sort of these other languages that have been available. Now, and I think this sort of speaks to the point that the IBAO doesn't just provide, or hasn't just been providing certifications. You've been kind of developing, or developing or working with other folks from other countries to develop sort of the infrastructure to obtain these certifications. And so a lot of the work that it seems like, the bulk of the work wasn't actually creating, a certification for a behavior analyst and a therapist. It seems like that, there was just some stuff there, but I think a lot of that you could have, I was involved in some of it, and by no means were we, copying and pasting from the BACB and that sort of thing. But we definitely had some templates to kind of work off of and sort of, maybe make some decisions and make things kind of more contextually fit for, these different sorts of areas. But you and the board have done a incredible amount of work helping folks develop these trainings in all these countries, in all these different languages. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's something that I don't think folks are aware of. I think folks just think that the IBAO is a, I think you're doing a good job with your social media and your promotion these days, kind of getting that out. But I think for a while, folks just thought, these were folks that just created pieces of paper that had I in it instead of BC or whatever.
Yeah, that's fair. We've, if you remember back to some of the initial board-wide meetings that we had, some of them, were to really establish what are the barriers and obstacles that we need to take into consideration for all the things that we do moving forward. One of the things, like I mentioned, was cost. Another one was lack of opportunity locally to to get the training. So IBAO, although technically you can, there needs to be firewalls in place, but our decision was not to provide the training itself, right? We could have created a group of people and say, here's the training, stuck it on a really, kind of slick LMS, have people go through it, take our exam, et cetera. Decided not to do that. But you could, you could do you could do coursework and do an exam. How could we impact the growth of providers without doing it ourselves? And part of the reason that there were restrictions may not be the best, but part of the reason why there were so few providers in different places was the fact that you had to be a university or college, with few exceptions, to be a provider. Now,
Right.
I've talked to people on both sides of the fence about this, and some people are really sort of diehard, like you have to be a university or college. Anything else is substandard. I don't agree with that. Our professional advisory board didn't agree with that, and so personally, my view about it was a lot of if you go back kind of historically, when I was training, there were no online programs in ABA. They literally didn't exist. If you wanted to study this field, you had to basically move to a university town, give up 3 to 5 years of your life, find the right fit, research wise and faculty wise, and you were their underling until you came out. And even back in I graduated in 2002, there were a lot of people who expressed real disappointment in me or with me for not going into faculty, because at the time there was a totally different mindset around what is behavior analysis and what is applied behavior analysis. And it was like this, the concept was almost like, this is just the pure science, right? It needs to be at a university level. You need to study it there. You need to do research to benefit the world. And if you go into private practice, you're kind of bastardizing that to some extent, because there's this other motive out there. And how are you not contributing in a way to this, the big bright light that is science as a pure pursuit? And it was difficult a little bit. There were people who were almost like, well, you're not in a faculty position, you're not doing research, even though we were occasionally, but it was sort of looked down upon a little bit. Like, you don't have a NIH grant to do this research. This is more like scientist practitioner stuff. You're doing these studies as they come up. But there was a difference between what it meant to practice then than it does now. There was no, historically, if you go back, there was no advertising, there was no marketing, there was no social media, there weren't cutesy names and rainbows and butterflies, and there wasn't an industry, there was no profession around it. I mean, this was all tied to university laboratories, more or less, and faculty consultation. That's not the case now, right? So the older people in this field, and I'm unfortunately throwing myself into that, we have a different. There's a lot of us have a different attitude about what it means to sort of be properly trained. And if you move that into today's world, there's a conflict. But if the majority, I think I saw a stat, 58% of behavior analysts are trained on online only programs. So the majority of people get their education online. It's just come a long way, and it's different now than it was in the past. And of those programs, I'm not aware that all of those programs have, full-time dedicated, tenured faculty. A lot of these are adjunct faculty. You teach a course here. I mean, I've been offered these teaching spots dozens of times over my career from different universities, and so I know other people who have done that as well. So these are a lot of them full-time practitioners who do, a class here or there in the evenings or whatever it happens to be. So if you're qualified, if you have the information, you have the right education, the right certifications or whatever, especially as a practice, I mean, the ABA is an applied field. That's a practitioner's field. So if you have the information to pass on, why should a requirement be that you work for a university, right? You can get your paycheck anywhere as long as you have what it takes to pass on the information to the next person. So it was important for us to address, there are a lot of qualified people out there that can be approved content providers that have nothing to do with colleges or universities. And as long as we, can maintain some semblance of a gatekeeper to these qualifications, then that opens exponentially the number of options and possibilities where they didn't exist before. And in doing that, if there's no options or one option, they're going to set the cost. Like IBAO doesn't tell content providers what to charge, but if there's competition, right, there's a free market effect that should drive costs down, and then people who are seeking different options have different options to choose from, and they can go by cost if that's the main consideration.
So, because we really good point. So we talked early on about sort of the master's degree being, that requirement for the BCBA and all the efforts that take. Can one get a behavior analyst certification through the IBAO and not have a master's degree? Zigzag is an autism therapy management platform. At its core, Zigzag seamlessly allows management of programs, adding, editing, changing long-term and short-term objectives on the go. Zigzag makes data collection super easy for therapists on site and automatically calculates progress, providing you with session summaries and graphs in real time. Zigzag provides you the ability to manage all of your clients, whether they be center or home-based, and work with all the various therapists and parents seamlessly. Zigzag is based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and is fully compliant with both federal and provincial privacy requirements. Book a demo now at www.zigzagkid.com/product demo and get a free 30-day trial. The second secret word is Georgia.
Yes, one can. So there's a couple different, important reasons why that's possible. But the short answer is yes. So let me preface this by saying we're not anti-education. I find personally, that I'm a curious individual, and I'm trying to consume all kinds of different things, regularly. So I appreciate it, even if they have nothing to do with our field. There's a lot of benefit to being more educated, not in some nebulous sense, but just in the practical sense that you probably have to do projects and time management and organization and test taking, and you just have to order your life a certain way to be successful. So we're pro education, and I think to the extent that people can be as educated as possible, they should be. That being said, there are a lot of places where the educational system around the world doesn't line up very well with the United States educational system.
Yes,
and that causes our predecessors, if you will, to deny certain people from even not applying, with their applications get rejected. There are places that don't have a 4-year bachelor's degree, a 2 years master's degree, and then another 2 to 4 or 5 year doctorate. Some of these are hybrid programs. Some quote unquote bachelor's degrees are 3 years in certain places. Some master's degrees are 4 years total, because a lot of folks don't take the first 2 years of humanities and literature and foreign language and all the kind of classes that you take in a U.S. university before you get to your actual major of study. You just hit the ground running. So there's incompatibility, for one, that we're trying to be flexible with and acknowledge that the educational system somebody has is the educational system in their area. So why hold them to a standard that they literally can't control? The other part, the master's degree part, is interesting, and there are really interesting discussions around this in the advisory board, coming up with the different routes to the IBA. The BACB has had at time, sort of off and on, the requirement where the master's degree has to be in a quote unquote related field. That in and of itself to me is interesting, because being in a related field is really kind of defined as education, special education, psychology in general, whatever. Sure. But how related or how relevant are those programs? I don't know. You can make an argument probably for or against. I lean a little bit more towards the against, because what it is we do is a subspecialty. It's a very niche area within behavioral psychology. So to say, someone has education experience, general education experience, out of the box, special education experience. I've talked to a lot of people, and I have some firsthand knowledge that most special education programs, they don't go into ABA. It may be mentioned as an intervention approach or whatever, but this is not. You don't learn about motivating operations in special education classes.
No.
You certainly don't in general ed. I wish I had better numbers, but my feeling is the overwhelming majority of master's degrees in psychology are probably anti-theoretical, anti-philosophical to applied behavior analysis.
Yep.
So you're checking a box, a lot of folks, that is irrelevant to the very subspecialty that we're being certified in. I have my own. So we've had the consultation company, as I talked about, since 2005, and I've largely been the one to do the hiring. And for a long time, it didn't matter if people had BCBA or not, because it was a new thing. It was nice if you had it, but it wasn't a must because it was more about rapport and analytical skills, whatever. But we had this person who was a master's BCBA. She was awesome, great with kids, great with parents, could handle herself in a room, full of attorneys and everything else. Her master's degree was in physical education. She was literally a tennis pro, got hurt, got into this field, at the time, it was probably like a 4 or 5 course sequence, and she was awesome. She was a master's BCBA. And if you see that, I think people just commonly assume, oh, your master's degree is in this field that you have this specialty in, and it's not. It might be more now. In fact, I would bet that as we continue, as behavior analysis in the U.S. continues, that there will be more and more people whose master's degrees are in ABA, because there's more and more ABA master's programs. These things didn't exist before, and if they did, they were few and far between.
Yep.
Western Michigan being one of, even going back to when I was going into graduate school, Western Michigan University probably had the only, that I recall offhand, the only master's level ABA track that was available. Maybe I had one. There probably were a couple others, but it's the only one that I remember offhand.
Sure.
So if the master's degree, even in a quote unquote related field, doesn't really add any value specifically to ABA, not any value period, just specifically to ABA, then why is it important? And during the times when the related field condition is not even present, right? You can have a master's degree in history, you can have a master's degree in business administration, sociology, dentistry, like who cares? If it's not really specifically geared towards this, then I do feel like there's just kind of this weird artificial inflation of degrees that are that people assume, the general population may assume is directly related to what it is we specialize in, and it's really not. It really is literally not. So people get their education from a verified course sequence. They get it from the required hours, and that's the important part. Those 270, 315 now, those are the numbers of hours specifically in the field that you're being certified in. Again, that's not that there's no value. It's not that there's no help. If you can get a master's in ABA, you should. That's awesome. That doesn't exist most places. It's becoming more and more ubiquitous here, but it doesn't exist most places. And even historically here, it hasn't. It's just there's been a ramping up over time, but it's So when you peel apart that particular requirement, how does that specifically benefit the candidate who's seeking to become a behavior analyst? If really all of the information relevant to the exam and the practice and the supervision and the knowledge and what it is they're going to do, when they provide services comes from this select group of classes, then why isn't that select group of classes in and of itself what it is the requirement is? And that sort of way of thinking is what led to us to say, if you have a master's degree, you can get this core amount of ABA content. If you don't have a master's degree, you can get this core amount of ABA content, because that's what the certification is about. That's what it is we're doing. It's not a general intelligence test. It's not a academic kind of everybody put their degrees on the line type of thing. No, what is it? If it's not relevant to this particular field, then why are we concerned with that as a requirement for a very specific certification?
No, really good points. And I'm with you. I won't keep going on the master's degree thing, but I'm definitely on the same page, just in consideration of time. There's kind of three areas I kind of wanted to get into. Hopefully we can touch on them all before we run out of time here. One, I wouldn't mind hearing if you mind telling folks just a little bit about the professional advisory board, because I think obviously that's been, beyond integral to everything you've done. This has not been, Mike Mueller, creating the IBAO and doing all this on his own, while running his consulting firm. Maybe just tell us a little bit about, who's on the PAB in terms of not by name, but sort of, where do they come from? How many folks are on there, and sort of the kind of work that these folks have been doing over the last few years.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's it's important, because this is not, I got the ball rolling, and I'm extremely supportive of the people who we have, but the professional advisory board has been the one to create the requirements, to create the certifications, to create the ethics guidelines, to create the applications for approved content providers and CEU providers, and establish the everything, frankly. So there's a little bit of a history, because it has morphed a little bit over time relative to what our goals are and what it is we're doing. So initially, it was, some of my personal contacts that I know of behavior analysts that are or have been or do, or whatever the case may be, work abroad outside the U.S. And colleagues of colleagues, and sort of friends of friends, but all behavior analysts. And the initial goal was, again, to try to understand the difficulties the international community faces when seeking certification, and how can we address those as we go forward and create our own certifications. So the first iteration really was 45 or so people from, I think, 23 different countries. You're included in that. Very, very grateful for that. And it was a very creative process. It was a very creative process, because it was at the first question is, well, what certifications are needed? And if you remember back to some of these early discussions, it was like, well, we need something that's sort of RBT level. Some people wanted the BCABA kind of level. Other people were pushing for a BCBAD type of level. People wanted really specific autism-related certifications. And then people like you, part of your voice was, I don't work with that. I don't do early intervention. Like, I'm in the public schools doing PBS, and, so it was like, if you remember, we tried to block out our history, even though it's impossible, and say, like, forget everything that the BACB has done. Like, what do we need? What's important? I don't know if you remember this too, but there were discussions about, like, let's have real, basic, just ABA certifications, and then on top of that, you could have an autism kind of writer, an OBM writer, PBS writer.
I remember that.
Which I thought was a really clever idea, because it would establish sort of empirically what you need to do to change from one kind of subspecialty to the next. So if you want to do pediatric feeding, and you've been consulting in office buildings or whatever else, helping human resources do OBM stuff, can you just switch from one to the next? And I don't know that there's super clear guidelines. I know that you're supposed to study and practice and consult, but that's kind of that's a very vague idea for a lot of people, for me too. So what would you have to do to establish these other sub-certifications, which would better allow someone to, the community to appreciate where it is your training and focus is at. So, after all the dialogue and discussion and debate, we obviously landed on, two different certifications. Nobody felt like there was a need to have a BCBAD type certification, because as far as I know, there's literally no difference. I drank the Kool-Aid. I have a D. I bought the D.
Yeah.
But I've always just thought it was really redundant. Like, especially when you look at the initials after people's names, like the PhD comes before the BCBA, so who cares? Here I sit with the D. So when we try, but when we kind of boiled that stuff away, I was like, no, that's not important. The same thing with the assistant level. If we have a non-master's route, then why also have a different distinction for some, assistant, associate level, whatever it's called? So that didn't make any sense. And then, we formed committees to set about creating the different requirements and what's important and what's not, and with ethics and everything that came after that. And I got to say, I mean, I was involved in the different committees, and what a fun, creative, professional, low drama, experience. I mean, you really have people, different cultures, different everything, all over the world. Most of us had never met, all kind of coming together to lay out our thoughts and opinions and histories and experience like this. And there was no nobody sticking their feet in the ground and saying that my way, the highway, or I don't want to be part of this. I mean, it was very, very collegial, very professional, very respectful.
Yes.
It was and the end result, as a group of good listeners, was, you didn't have to agree with everything, although most people did, pretty much. Everything, once you kind of hash things out, especially with the idea of how we're trying to solve these existing problems, things made sense. So, as it relates to the professional advisory board, they were very, very concrete roles for a certain period of time. And then, the required educational objectives and the training standards and all the different things that were being created were created. So then the roles kind of shifted a little bit to just education and dissemination, and use contacts to try to establish as many connections as possible. Some were very fruitful. Some were total dead ends. Then sort of after that became the big drive was translation. So we have everything in English. Now we have other language groups. German, Turkish, Filipino, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Hindi, Hungarian. I'm looking at my list. Italian, Japanese, Lithuanian, Nepali, Romanian, Russian, Arabic, Chinese. All of these, all of the documents, all of the requirements, all these kind of things are translated into those languages.
That's
we have
amazing.
17 languages of continuing education providers, and the list is growing. I mean, so this is like, there's been this really cool kind of grassroots effort, and not to be cheesy about it, but there's that cliche, like, think globally, act locally. This is literally what has happened, because the language groups that we've had, the people who are putting in the effort to do this, want to do it because they care about the community that they are in, and they want to see people be able to know what to do, and they want to see people be able to be successful in their area. And as these as these different groups do that, that's exactly what's being created. We have the exam right now is in currently available in English, Portuguese, and Arabic, and we have very, very close drafts of Russian, Ukrainian, Spanish, French. So it's really wild. So part of the way that the professional advisory board has grown is it's gone from the focus in the role, and the contributors have changed a little bit. And we've added people, really, frankly, not with a specific role other than to be kind of an ambassador, a representative from an area. And when we've needed feedback, or we've had questions, or what's the best way to do things, or how should we do things, it comes from an informed approach from the people who are there. Right? It's not from my house in Atlanta. I can put some meetings together, and I can weigh in on different things, but these are really localized groups that have decision making power and direction behind them.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, I think, and as I'm sure you know, I think one thing you've you've also done sort of, maybe unintentionally, but is you've really created a community, an international community of behavior analysts. I mean, there always was, ABAI is called ABA International, and they do have the odd conference in some maybe European country and every now and then. But it's still really an American organization, primarily English and primarily run by American folk with the odd sort of international rep here and there. But this professional advisory board has really become sort of an unofficial, it's a community. It's an international community of behavior analysts. Like I just to sit in a meeting with someone from just in the early stages. I was sitting in a meeting with someone from Japan and someone from India and someone from Germany and someone in Brazil, and just the networking opportunities alone for all of these folks, I'm sure has been just probably the biggest reinforcer of all for a lot of these folks.
Oh, I mean, it has been for me personally. I don't know. My experience working with people is like, you get friendly with them. You feel like you know them. I mean, anybody on the advisory board, if I'm, where they are, I will, be happy to take them out for dinner or drinks or, hang out and just, kind of bond with them in a professional and kind of non-professional setting. Yeah. But you're right. The large, especially early on with some of the larger Zoom meetings, when you really do have people from 15 different places, it just feels like the world is a much smaller place than when you see everything on a map. You have all these people in a room, getting along, sharing more or less the same experiences. It's like it's different. The experiences are different in different places, but big picture, the issues that people face in these different areas is shockingly similar. That was one of the, kind of the biggest surprises as we talked to people all over the world, is really how similar their experiences were related to obtaining other certifications and ABA infrastructure, lack of recognition, funding sources, all of these things. If ABA in the U.S. is sort of the most progressive and has the longest history, there's other places around the world who are literally just getting started, which is it is discouraging for some in one kind of point of view, but it's also, I think it also allows people to learn from what's happened here in the U.S. Which is also a little bit strange too, because I've talked to people, and I'm sure you have too, where it's like people are striving towards national recognition, meaning they want to be recognized as a profession in their country, right? Yeah. They want to establish their own category for what it is we do, especially as service providers. And typically what that means is government regulation. It's licensure, basically. That's sort of the ultimate goal. And you say, well, a different way to think about that is even here in the U.S., we only have about half of the states that have licensure laws for behavior analysis. Right? So that means really kind of in a way, the other half don't have official recognition and regulation from a government. And when you kind of put it in that light, people are like, oh, wow, yeah. So maybe it's not that it's not important, but if it's taken us this long to sort of get halfway there, and there's no national, we don't have any national recognition and regulation. It's state by state. But when you look at, and there's only a very very small, not small examples, but there's only a couple examples in the rest of the world where they have regulation and licensure nationally. And if you look at the U.S. path, the path that it took was adopt certifications as the clinical educational training standard, right? If you look at every existing U.S. State licensure law, the requirements to be licensed in your state it's worded one of two ways. Either you have to have the BCBA, or you have to have the BCBA and or another accredited certification in behavior analysis. The idea of getting from one to the other is not well documented. The using certifications to advance and use that standard to then kind of piggyback on for national regulation has been very well established. So there's no competition between those seeking certification and those with the goal of whatever comes after that. These can be very, very complementary activities.
Right on. You mentioned accreditation there. I think early on, I don't know if it's still the case now, but one of there were a lot of criticisms when the IBAO first came on the scene, which is interesting in that and I'm not looking to badmouth these other organizations, but once the BACB said we're not going to do this anymore, well, obviously someone had to do something, or we're saying that only North America can have behavior analysts, and I don't think anyone thought that should be the case, and yet there was so much pushback initially about the IBAO because it wasn't accredited. Yeah. It's not accredited, and you can only be you're only useful if you're accredited. I think folks don't realize the history, especially of sort of the BACB. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what accreditation actually means, and the process of getting it, and comparing that to the other currently accredited, There is a lack of diversity when it comes to educational material depicting Black children in the field of applied behavior analysis. Human Expressions gives Black and brown children realistic and detailed images of kids who look like them, modeling everyday skills that may be difficult for them to communicate or express. At Human Expressions, the benefits of representation for Black and brown kids in educational curricula are clear. Increased self-esteem, reducing stereotypes, and increased validation and support. To learn more, go to www.humanexpressions.org. That's human, HUEMAN, expressions.org. The second secret word is Georgia. The third secret word is credit.
Yeah, sure. It's important. But I'll tell you what. This is my my true feelings on the matter. Is most of the people who ask this question have no idea what they're asking about. Anybody who asked this question in the first 6 months that we were organized has no idea what they're asking about. Historic, and the reason why is it's a very in-depth process. It's a process that takes years. You have to have a lot of things in place, documented, audited, evaluated, and it takes a lot of time. So the BACB started in 1998. They were accredited in 2008. 10 years. 10 years, right? So my BCBA, which I got in 2002, I did not get when the BACB was accredited. There's the QABA, which started in 2012, right? They got accreditation for their certifications in 2020, 8 years. Yeah, eight years. So we have 8 years and 10 years, respectively, for the other two organizations that provide certifications of behavior analysis. So for someone to say, 6 months in, a year in, like it's a knock on us that we're not accredited, doesn't understand the process. They don't understand what they're at. They don't understand what they're asking about. The timing alone tells you that much. So it would be impossible for us to be accredited right now. We feel it's important. We're taking all the right steps. We have an accreditation committee within the professional advisory board, 3 people of which are obtained certifications in the accreditation process. We are following all the steps. Literally, before we even formed the organization, we knew the importance because we were aware of the importance of this right out of the gate. Not that you can get it out of the gate, but we were aware of why. And so we signed up as a member of ICE, and it's Institute for Credentialing Excellence, and they have materials and courses and classes and guides that as you do things in roughly the way that you should do them, leading to accreditation. So when you get to the point where you can apply, you have a more successful chance of being accredited. So it's essentially like it's an audit, more or less, to make sure that your processes are free of bias and you are doing things in the way that you say you are doing things. And this is a very, very in-depth check on everything from financial, legal, verification. So if you say, okay, you have to have a master's degree in this route, show me the process that you go through to ensure that someone has a master's degree, or experience hours, or whatever else. There's all kinds of things. And very importantly, there are all kinds of such psychometric properties of the exam that have to be there that can't even be analyzed until you have hundreds of people having taken the exams. So the job training analysis, the exam setting, and I don't know I can't remember right offhand if you were part of the team that did the exam validity testing and all these things. There's all these different things that we've done to subject matter experts and generating items and all the different things that went into that. All of these things are checked. And once you get to a certain point, then you can have psychometrists come in who we're beginning to consult with now, even though frankly this is still premature. Like I talked to somebody this week who said, you're really for where your organization's at, 2 to 5 years is a reasonable expectation for certification. And that fits. Like again, look at the other ones. But it's, I don't know the right way to phrase, like in my mind, I feel like it's like you've conducted a research study, you've submitted it for publication, and like it's in review. You're right. Like we don't feel like we've done anything really out of whack for what the accreditation process will require, because we've been following the guides of the accreditation bodies since we started. But it can't be something that we have right now. But we're continuing to do things in a way that are appropriate with respect to getting accredited.
And what will that mean once you're accredited? I mean, beyond the fact that, you have this label that says you do all these things unbiased. I mean, if all these folks are already getting certified and countries are starting to recognize it and so on and so forth, is there a benefit? There must be.
I think it's an objective third-party review that shows you are doing what you say you're doing, that you are discriminating, all the process discriminate people who are masters in this field and those who aren't. Your exam has the capacity to kind of root out that middle area. Someone who gets 100% on the exam is not in doubt, right? And someone who gets 0 on the exam is not in doubt. There's a middle area, so to speak, this borderline area that the exam has to do a good job at deciding, does this person meet the minimum standards of the field or not? And the accreditation process at the end of this will give everybody an extra boost of confidence that we're doing that. So the accreditation process is not a requirement to deliver certifications. It's not a requirement, period. I mean, it may be a requirement for a state licensure to say if you have this, then you can also be an LBA. That's neither here nor there. With actual what the role of the certification body is. But it gives people an extra boost of confidence that we are actually determining who has met the standards and who hasn't. And it's just it's a third party objective audit and evaluation is essentially what it is at its core. It looks at everything.
So I know you can't predict the future, but when the IBAO is accredited, and the fact that you have sort of a pathway to certification without getting a master's degree, do you see a time someday where maybe the IBA credential is even recognized here in North America? Or do you? Yeah. Or because the reason I ask that is because I don't know that it's important right now, but I started to think about sort of and we're seeing this a lot, I think, sort of post COVID with a lot of professions needing people, and so we're starting to see governments doing things like removing certain requirements from, say, a nurse in Bangladesh to have to take special exams to be a nurse in Canada, the equivalency, or to sort of meet up to that par, and so I wonder, and really, I obviously don't know the answer to this, but I wonder, could we get to a point where we could have a 20-year accredited IBAO certified behavior analyst moving to the U.S. and continuing to be a behavior analyst without having to go get a master's degree?
That's a good question. I do think that if it continues to be a state by state requirement for licensure, or at some point country by country, when people do get recognitions, there could be the expectation in some states or some areas or some countries that you need a master's degree and a certification of behavior analysis. It could be the case in others that you just simply need the certification. So it could be more of a localized decision, but we'll have to see how it plays out. Our goal is not to to be a competitor of the BACB.
Right.
Our goal is specifically an international mission, but if we get when we get the accreditation and state licensure laws allow that certification to access the same funding benefits as others, then that would be an option. But that's not the forefront of our thinking. We have
no, of course not. Yeah. No, really cool. So what's so we're 3 years in now, and the BACB has officially sort of made the call for, except for a few of these countries. How's it been? Are you getting a lot of? Are there a lot of IBAs now? How many folks do you have certified?
Well, there's about 1,900 people in the platform. We're getting more candidates than ever before because now there are no other options. So what we've seen as the deadline, the BACB's deadline neared, is just anybody who could possibly attempt to get those was getting those. That was the main push. Like if you can still get in that window, then that was the main push. And now, because that's not an option, people are now pursuing this option. So it's interesting because now there will probably be a lag between kind of registering as a candidate and then fulfilling the entire requirement package and sitting for the exam. But this is the point that we wanted to get to. This is where we want to be. We've had a tremendous amount of help and support, and we're in good shape. And I think we've done everything the way that we should have done it, and considered all the things that we should have considered. And I think we're in a good place. the different groups and the appreciation and people disseminating, what it is and what it's not, is growing. And I'm really happy with where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. I know you mentioned early on, I think you probably got a few more folks now, but early on you had folks from about 23 countries on your advisory board. That's probably higher now. But I know there's, close to a couple hundred countries in the world. If folks are listening, and I know the last time I looked at my stats, I had folks from 70 countries listening. So granted, there's like the one guy in Mali, so
we'll take it.
If these folks, maybe wanted to get involved with the advisory board, or just sort of, start developing some things in their country, or maybe in their language, or just be involved in some way, are you open to that? And how would they kind of go about doing that?
Yeah, of course. So right now, well, not right this second, but in the next month or so, the Professional Advisory Board is going to go through another kind of iteration where we still will want representatives because we want voices from as many places as possible. But because of the this path that we're on for accreditation, there will be more concrete roles in committees where people have more, expectations of some level of effort and engagement. And as we kind of reform this, my guess is that some people who have been with us during the creation period may not want to go through that again, and they may want to, kind of drop off the board. And if they do, we will be eternally grateful for their advice and their contributions. And we'll get some new people in. The size of the committees and the specific expectations will still be being ironed out over the next month or two. So the short answer is yes. Anybody that wants to contribute, wants to have their voice heard, wants to represent, where they are, that both translation and information, other ways, they would either, they can probably just email me directly, and it's mmueller at theibao.com. So mmueller at theibao.com, or info at, and we can go from there. But yeah, we, there's a balance, and I don't know the formula, but there's a balance. Like we don't need 500 people on the advisory board.
Right.
So it depends on what it is we're doing. And as we talk to the consultants that are helping us kind of line up the accreditation parts correctly, there are parts that will eventually need X amount of people in a certain place for subject matter experts and standard setting and things like that for the specific translated exams. But we're not to that point, but we will need, in some places, definitely more than one. We'll need a team. But anybody interested, we're happy to have conversations and inform and see if it's a good fit and go forward.
Yeah. Well, I know some people just might want to network, and I think I guess you have a membership directory as well. So if folks just want to find colleagues in other parts of the world, they can go on the website and track folks down that way too, right?
We have a directory. I don't know that it's possible to get direct contact information from there. I don't think your emails are just around. Right. Probably a bad idea if they are, but I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. But I can find so and so's name and what country they're from, and know there's a behavior analyst maybe in the country next door that I could reach. Yeah,
absolutely. And if someone says, "Hey, how can I get a hold of this person?" we would be happy to go to that person and say, "Hey, so and so wants to get a hold of you. If you're cool with that, we can pass it on."
Perfect. That's amazing. Well, Mike, I know personally that there's many people in the world that are grateful to you and the PAB for developing this. Something I will say, there was a lot of criticism early on. I haven't seen much of that at all these days. In fact, I've seen the opposite. I've seen so much more support, especially just here in North America. There's a lot more. I've seen a lot more BCBAs that have the IBA after their name now that are clearly showing that support. They don't need it. There's no reason to get it, beyond I think supporting the cause and understanding that we're we're a global community. And so, really impressed with what's happened in just 3 years. And it'll be incredible to see where we are in 10 years, 15 years, and that sort of thing. It's going to be quite amazing, I think. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. There are a lot of people who are adding the certification. I think it's a show of solidarity. It's a show of kind of global unity. It's awesome. I agree. There's a ton of support. It feels really good in the direction that it's going. And so you were a good part of this. You had very influential ideas and decisions and opinions that I think were very well respected. And as a public thank you, I know we've done it, on our side meetings and things like that, but we wouldn't have what we have without you and colleagues like you. So it's awesome.
Wow.
Thank you again.
Well, thanks, Beck. I appreciate it. And definitely once, maybe in a few years when there's more, some other cool things happening, we'll bring you back on and get an IBAO update.
Anytime. Let me know. I appreciate the opportunity to get this info out, and thanks again. Appreciate it, Ben.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.